And this is what my book is about. It's effortless abundance. We don't have to do things. We just have to be aligned to what we want. Really hold that in our heart, and everything will be lined up for us. Everything will be lined up for us. It's only when we're trying to action, trying to work it out from our mind, that things get really hard and life gets really hard and we struggle and we suffer. But when we just trust and surrender and let go, things will automatically happen. I'm not saying that they're going to happen the next day, like in this instance. There's other things that haven't happened the next day, but they've happened in divine timing, and they've happened exactly when they needed to happen.
Hello, welcome to this glorious day. Well, Eleni, my soul sister, and I are talking about her book that is going to be out on the shelves before we know it, Effortless Abundance. Less push, more joy. And I recall last time we were speaking about the 3 parts of your book. Tell us a little bit more, Eleni. I can't wait to hear about these parts and then what's entailed in all of them. So those 3 parts are, what are they?
So the first section is the awakening experience. So what actually happened to me to awaken and what that actually means. So the circumstances that led to that. And the second part are my 8 mind expanding revelations that I received from that awakening and how that completely transformed my life. And I do everything differently now, everything, the way that I think, the way that I act, the way that I receive, the way that I love. And the last part, section 3, is what are the tools to integrate those learnings and revelations into our daily life. And so just to give a little bit of context in terms of section 1, in terms of what actually happened and how did I have this awakening at the age of 53, was that I was drawn and almost felt like a compulsion to have a plant medicine ceremony. And that occurred during, this compulsion was during the lockdowns that we all had across the globe. And I was drawn to watching some documentaries on ayahuasca. And I could see the incredible transformations that everybody was having with this magical plant medicine, which is very ancient. So I just want to, first of all, dispel some myths. When people hear plant medicine, in their mind, they're thinking, well, they're psychedelics. Yes, they are known as psychedelics, but that is a very low vibrational word. In actual fact, it's plant medicine because it's been given to us by the earth and by Mother Earth, and I believe God, and it's a portal into the other realms. And when people take things like what they call magic mushrooms or psilocybin or any of those plants, and the intention is to take it for fun, that's fine, no judgment there. But this is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about taking plant medicine for fun or for recreational purposes, because the intention is really important. Whatever you put out there is the intention, that's what you're going to get, because these are very, very powerful. I'm talking about a plant medicine ceremony with a seasoned shaman who has been trained by Peruvian elders under 550 unbroken lineages. So it's very sacred, held in a beautiful space of reverence, and there's prayers. And so we're bringing in the spirits of the plant to assist us with our spiritual growth. And I do not recommend that anybody does this without a seasoned shaman, where you know that they are reputable and you know that they hold the altar in a very sacred way. I just wanted to make sure that I don't come across as, yeah, go do that, this is going to change your world. Like, it needs to be an altar that's held in reverence by a very experienced shaman, is my opinion.
And I remember you saying that you had a calling for it, and some people are called to it and some people aren't. It's not just an experience you go run to. I'm curious, before we get into how it changed your life, because as your soul sister, I've seen it change you in massive ways. But before we get into that, we go through a lot of our lives, or many of us do, not even knowing what ayahuasca or plant medicine is. How did it fall into your lap where you even knew to look at YouTube videos around it?
Yeah, so how it fell into my lap was a relative from England was connected and fell in love with someone who had started this journey of going to Costa Rica and taking plant medicine ceremonies. And I just followed his journey because he had many, many followers. And I was just curious because he had over 1 million followers, 1.4 million. I was like, who is this person that she's connected with and what is he doing? And I just saw his journey, and that's what got me curious. But the thing is, and this is the way it works, is that it wouldn't have got me curious if it wasn't for me, if it wasn't my path,
Right
if
time.
it wasn't my journey. Like there's so many other people that would have seen the same story and would have gone, well, that's a bit freaky, that's not for me. But I was like, oh my God, what is this? This is really fascinating. And I just was like watching documentary after documentary. And then, as I described in our last video that we did, as soon as I decided that I was going to go to Costa Rica the moment that lockdown was over, the next day, what actually happened was that I pulled a muscle just as I was stretching just in my house. And then I had to go and get that fixed because I was in a lot of pain. And I had recalled that 3 different people told me about this particular physical therapist that was excellent. In fact, he was vision impaired, he couldn't see, but he was excellent with his hands. And so I went to him and he just started talking about it. Now, the reason that I knew that I needed to do something with the person that he was talking about was because this person, this physical therapist, had a very conservative look about him. This is where judgment comes in. He wasn't wearing dreadlocks, he wasn't wearing hippie clothes. He didn't look like, he was into psychedelics or anything like that. He was a very conservative looking man who was wearing just normal beige trousers and conservative shoes and a beige shirt. And he looked like a very conservative person, very well spoken, very smart. And he started telling me about plant medicine happening right here in where I lived, in the city that I lived, in Melbourne. And I was fascinated. I didn't know that you could actually have access to a ceremony in the city that I lived. And it was absolutely incredible. And so the way that it happens is very underground because it's illegal. So he had to pass my details on to this shaman. It's not like I could just ring the shaman up. And it can only be by referral. So it had to be that he knew me. So he talked to me quite a bit about what my intentions were and so on. So then what happened was this shaman rang me up and interviewed me. So um, if I was on any kind of antidepressants or anything like that, he wouldn't have taken me on because it would have been a contraindication. So he asked me what my purpose was, what my intention was. If it was going to be because I just was curious or I just wanted to have fun, he wouldn't have taken me on. It was about me knowing that I needed to expand my spiritual growth and knowing that this is something that I needed to do. And so then we organized the date of the ceremony. And then what actually happened, and it's interesting that I'm saying this now because we're recording this on the 1st of May. And on the 1st of March, my dad actually got taken into hospital in 2021. And I had planned this ceremony to be like the 7th of March. And obviously, I wasn't going to do it when my dad was in hospital because you're out of action for a whole day. And I couldn't be not contactable for a day. So it was all about my dad. So I completely switched priorities and made it all about my dad, went into the hospital and basically lived in the hospital with him for his last few months. And he passed 1st of May 2021, which is today is the 1st of May 2024, so it's 3 years later. And I didn't get around to going to and doing the ceremony until the 7th of July, 2021, which is your birthday. And that's when I had my ceremony. So I'll just give you a little bit of a description as to what actually happened that day. You can see this in the previous episode, but my ego was running riot, and I didn't know that this was anything different to my normal, week to week in terms of the way that I lived. What I mean by that is that it was trying to control everything and trying to manage everything in a really kind of frenetic way, right until the moment that I was walked into the shaman's residence. I actually was texting staff and my team members madly about making sure that everything was okay. And I had this frenetic energy. And later on, I discovered as to what that was about, which I didn't know at the time. I just thought I was just trying to have everything okay so that when I go in, my business wasn't impacted on that day, that I wasn't contactable. The day before, I was very demanding to my staff, more demanding than usual. I was very controlling, very controlling. And I'll tell you later on as to what I now know actually happened the days preceding the plant medicine ceremony. And so I walked into the residence, and immediately I had this beautiful smell of Salo Panto. If you haven't smelt that, it's just every time I smell it now, it just takes me right back there. And it's all about making sure when we put Salo Panto, it's all about not only clearing the negative energies like sage does, but also preventing them from coming in the space and staying in the space. And sat down and talked about my intentions for the ceremony. We were given, there was one other person, my partner, and we were given Syrian rue, which was what we needed to drink before the actual psilocybin tea. So Syrian rue and psilocybin together is called Silawaska. So it's as powerful as ayahuasca, but a different plant. And we were given that to drink. And then we went in, and the whole room was decked out from artifacts from Costa Rica and feathers and rocks and a lot of things in the room that the mattresses were set out on either side of the room and blankets and tissues, and there was a bucket there in case we needed to purge. And we set the intentions, and my intention was that I wanted to understand what unity consciousness was, because I had heard that term so many times, unity consciousness, and I understood it from a theory perspective, but I didn't get, well, I don't understand, like how can I be you and you be me? We're two separate people. How is it possible that I'm you and you are me? How is it possible that I am God and God is me? How is it possible that we're just all one? I understood the concept of, we've all come from the same place, so we all have God's spark inside of us, and therefore we all have the light inside of us. But that was all theory. I didn't really feel it, to be honest. Like when I was talking to another person, I felt like that was another person. And I felt like I'm a separate person, and that's a separate person, and that's a separate person. And I also had the intention of expanding my spiritual growth as well. So, and what actually happened then was the shaman told us 3 rules that that we needed to abide by. The first rule was that the medicine always wins. In other words, don't try and fight the medicine. When something appears in front of you and it feels frightening and it feels foreign because you're not used to it, if you try and fight it and push it away, it's going to be worse. Just because there's no going around it, there's only going right into it. The second rule was Um, breathe every time you feel frightened or scared or unsure of what to do next. Just breathe as if you're breathing through a straw. So that was a new thing for me, to breathe through the straw. I've done many, many different breathing techniques, but to breathe through the straw. And the third thing is that we will never be left alone. If I needed any support whatsoever, to call him over and he would come and assist with whatever I was going through.
Oh, I just wanted to back up a little bit about how when you were speaking about you started following someone on YouTube, and then you ended up going to your physical therapist or physiotherapist, as you say it there in Australia. The smile on your face was beautiful, and what I was gathering from that is there are no coincidences.
Mhm.
Everything was lined up perfectly for this to change in your life at this time, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. And the fact that I had decided the day before, but it was a decision, it wasn't a confusion. This is every time spirit calls us, there's no confusion. Like it's an absolute, like the day before I had decided that as soon as the borders were lifted, I was going to Costa Rica. It wasn't, well, what's Costa Rica like? Is it even safe to travel there? Like, how much does it cost? Or do I have time? It was not, no question about it. It was the same, experience I've had before when I wanted to travel and see Graceland, Elvis Presley's home, which changed my life also in different ways, which we've discussed in other episodes and we can put down here. But this particular instance, it was an absolute. So as soon as I had decided, the universe just gave it to me on a silver platter. I didn't have to
And
go do
and you
anything.
didn't have to wait. It was like all of a sudden, immediately, okay, it's the time. Like there's no reason to wait for it. And
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And I didn't have to do anything. It was effortless. And this is what my book is about. It's effortless abundance. We don't have to do things. We just have to be aligned to what we want. Really hold that in our heart. And everything will be lined up for us. Everything will be lined up for us. It's only when
perfect.
we're trying to do, trying to action, trying to work it out from our mind that things get really hard and life gets really hard and we struggle and we suffer. But when we just trust and surrender and let go, things will automatically happen. I'm not saying that they're going to happen the next day, like in this instance. There's other things that haven't happened the next day, but they've happened in divine timing and they've happened exactly when they needed to happen.
Yes. So I hear you saying that we as humans make it hard. And yet when we make it effortless, the abundance comes in, which brings me to the tagline, less push, more joy. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'll describe, which will lead to that. I'll describe what I actually saw and felt in the ceremony because I haven't talked about that before. So we lay down and we had eye masks and the music was playing, really powerful music. And the first thing that I felt in my body was we took the psilocybin. So, like I said, the psilocybin and the Syrian root together is silawaska, is what it's called. And there was a lot of reverence and prayers and so on and around that. And as soon as I took it, put my eye mask on, my teeth started chattering really loud. It was almost like my body was trembling. And then I had this thought, and now I know it was the ego that was coming in strong because the ego knew what was happening. The ego knew that it was about to be exposed. I didn't know that. The human Eleni didn't know that. But the ego knew that. And so the ego tried to convince me that I was being fooled, that this wasn't this spiritual experience. I was just going to get high and I had wasted all my money and time. And so I started laughing hysterically because it was like, oh my God, I have been had. I'm such an idiot. Like, here I am thinking I'm going on this big spiritual journey. And in fact, I'm just getting high because all I could see was crazy colors. All I could see were these crazy, crazy, out of control colors just going in and out and around. My teeth were chattering. And so I started this like hysterical laugh because it was like the joke's on me. I'm,
Mm.
I'm like a fool. That's who I am. I'm a fool. And it nearly convinced me until I remembered what the shaman said, which is just breathe. Just find your breath. And I had been following a spiritual teacher who always said, whenever there's anything in the body, any kind of shaking or anything, any kind of uncertainty, find your breath, connect to your breath. Your breath is your connection to source. So all I did was start to really connect to my breath. And then I kept hearing the words, just trust, just trust, just trust. So the difference between the ego and the soul, it was the first time that it became apparent to me in the difference. The ego is very loud. It was going, you fool, you idiot. This is just you getting high. What is wrong with you that you actually fall for this kind of crap? Really loud. And the soul was like, just trust, just trust, just trust, just breathe. Very different energies. One is very calming and soothing, and one is very loud and abrasive. That is the first time that I differentiated between ego and soul. And so in every single chapter that I've got in my book, I've got 25 chapters, at the very beginning, I start with whatever topic I'm talking about in that chapter, how ego would say it, how ego would scream it and demand it, and how soul would whisper it. So it's two very, very, very different energies that I'm now very accustomed, after 3 years later, I'm very accustomed to understanding what's my ego, what's my soul. And then what happened was, the moment that I started to breathe and trust, those crazy, crazy, colorful lines, they all formed into a highway. So before it was very erratic and crazy and circular, they all formed into a highway, and I just followed the highway. And I followed the highway to a theater. And the theater was like one of those old, opulent theaters where there was a lot of gold. The curtains were like red velvet with gold tassels, and it opened up, and I was in shock for so many reasons. One is what my body felt. My body felt this love that I had never experienced in all my life. And you being a mother knows that the most profound love is that when we have a child. It was even like, it's hard to explain because words don't give it justice. But I always thought that the biggest, most profound love is that when we give birth and we have our own child. But this love was not just for something, it was through my whole body and shaking. And I saw the behind the scenes of my life. And I saw how everything was explained to me without words, without me hearing words. It was just explained to me that our life is an illusion, that we are just playing this character, that we are focused on what doesn't really matter in life. I saw things that started to make sense. I saw that I was the perfect product of my mother and father, and that I chose my parents, and I chose that specific family to be reincarnated in, because it's that family that is going to give me the basis and the foundation to do the mission work that I needed to do in life. And people listening to this would say, well, I didn't choose my family because, my dad was abusive, or my mum was this, or blah, blah, blah. Yes, you did. And that's why you chose them, because whatever lessons you needed to learn from your parents, whether it was challenging or not, because it would have been challenging for all of us at some level, you chose them so that you could do your mission work, so that you could fulfill your mission, whatever that is. And when I say mission work, I don't necessarily mean standing on a stage and talking to 1 million people. I just mean whatever it is that you're here to do on this earth, whatever energy you're supposed to carry. And so I saw that my dad is where I learned how to love and how to love deeply, because he loved me so deeply and so openly. I saw that my mum's hard work ethic is what I needed to have done, what I needed to do up to this point to get me to where I was at this point. But I also saw that the challenges that I experienced, particularly from my mother, were also needed for me to move beyond that and become my own person, because my mother was very controlling, and therefore I became very controlling. And she didn't do this because she, wanted to give me a hard time. She just did this because she believed this is the way to live. So this workaholism I totally received from her, but the ability to love big I received from my father. And so then, of course, there was a lot of grieving, where I cried bucket loads and bucket loads and bucket loads. It actually felt like I cried for hours, because this ceremony went for well over 12 hours. And I felt like I cried nonstop for about 4 hours. Like, you can't cry this much consciously. But the portal had opened and I cried so much. And I felt my dad guiding me towards seeing my mother for her worth, because all my life I was daddy's girl and it was all about my dad, and I was never close to my mum. I struggled with my mum. I struggled with how she wanted me to be. I could never match up to what she wanted me to be. She wanted me to be the perfect housewife and the perfect, you know, person who sits there and bakes goods and things like that, which I never wanted to do. And she sees value in that. And so I had many challenges with my mum, and my dad guided me towards understanding that even though he was so loving, he also had a strong ego, and my mum was more humble and lived in humility, and that is what I need to really hold in reverence now. So I had all these. The biggest love I've ever felt for my mum came from that moment where my dad was saying, I was this, yes, you love me, but look, I also had an ego. And that's where, you've also got an ego, and that's why we matched. But now you need to move towards really appreciating your mum for all that she is. She's different to you, but she's got so many qualities that it would be really good for you to now. The ego got you to this place, but now you need to embrace these other qualities to take you to the next level. And I also saw my ego. So my ego was a shock to me, because I always just thought I was confident. So I always just thought, I'm really confident. That's who I am. I'm a confident person. But I saw all the controlling behavior that I was doing the day before with my staff. I saw all the controlling behavior I was doing in the Uber all the way until we arrived at the shaman's residence. I saw all the way that I tried to control my life. I saw all the work that was non-stop. And for what? For what? And I saw that the things that really mattered are available to all of us, that there is effortless abundance if we just trust. And I saw many other things too. I was having an issue with one of my friends at that stage. I felt a bit rejected from her because she'd stopped contact from me. And I saw her side of the story. So I had instant, you know, before that day, I felt wronged and hurt, and that I was in the right and she was in the wrong. And then after that day, I really saw how I had wronged her. and her perspective. And I had such a huge compassion and love for her. Like, it was overwhelming love for her, um, as opposed to feeling sorry for myself, and overwhelming feeling of love for my partner, overwhelming feeling of love for all the key players in my life, even people that I worked with, overwhelming love for my team like never before. Like, their souls are here to support this mission in such a powerful way, that they are just as important as me in all of this. Like, the orchestra cannot just work with one instrument. So it was like seeing the value and the importance of every person. And it's not just about me doing my mission and then getting people to help me do that. It's about, well, I can't actually do it without them. They've got just as an important role as me. It's equal importance. So my love for them was huge. So much love for all the people in my life, in my work, and in my personal life.
How beautiful. So the symphony of everyone that is in your life is part of that unity consciousness. But what I heard you saying that was so beautiful is it sounded almost as if your dad was waiting for you to take your hand and to show you what it's like, or what your life gets to be when you lose that ego, or you not lose it, but you don't let it own and operate your life. Is
Yeah,
that
that's right. And that was an ego death. There's no doubt that my ego died in that ceremony. But what I wasn't aware of is that it comes back to life under different disguises. And I discuss this in my book. It's funny because at the end of the ceremony, Karen, when we were sharing our learnings and so on, I said to the shaman, well, my ego's gone. Like, it's gone and it's never coming back again. Like, it's finished. And he just had this knowing look on his face. And he said, it may be, but there are very few people on this planet that have no ego. And he gave one example, would be Eckhart Tolle. It would be one. And I absolutely have since spent time in a room where he taught for an evening, and you could feel it. So I absolutely agree with that. And there are, of course, other people on the planet. And this is where we have sages and masters and ascended masters and so on. But in that moment, I really, really, well, in that moment, it had dissolved. It had absolutely dissolved. But what actually happens, it rebuilds itself, and it rebuilds itself because now it's been found out and now it's been exposed. So it can't play the same things again. It can't do the same crap that it used to do before. So it actually comes under different disguises. So it quickly went into the disguise of spiritual ego. Like, we know more because we've had this experience, don't we? So then it takes a long time to actually see the spiritual ego. And then there's so many different disguises that the ego puts on because it's fighting for survival. It's fighting for to be back into the driver's seat. And so what I have done for the last 3 years in terms of integrating all my learnings is every time it tries to get into the driver's seat, I just make sure that it doesn't have that ability. So is my ego still with me? Yes, it is. Is it now in the driver's seat? Most of the time it's not.
I love it. And when it comes into the driver's seat, you kick it into the back seat, is what I'm hearing.
I can see it immediately.
Mhm.
Like, it's very obvious to me. It's whereas it never would have been obvious to me before, but now it's like, I see you. But this is important, not which is what I was doing to begin with. I was really judging it. Like, oh my God, it's still here? Like, all the work that I've done, like, I've done a dozen plant medicine ceremonies since then. Like, all the work I've done, all the self-observation I've done, all the learnings I've done. What? You're still here? But now the way that I see my ego is like a naughty little child, which you love. You love your naughty little child. It's like, cheeky, you cheeky things. This is the way I talk to it now. It's like, you cheeky little thing. Like, you're trying to get back in again. That's okay. You know what? I still love you regardless. It's okay. It's okay. You want instant gratification by having 2 big chocolate blocks? That's okay. Yep, I'll let you have that. But I'm going to be watching next time. So it's like giving it love instead of, because anything we resist persists. So if there was a stage where I was very resistant towards my ego because I could see it, and it would just keep coming up in other ways. But if it's loved and nurtured, but made sure that it's not running the show, just like a little child who's having a tantrum, you're not going to let them organize dinner, organize your household for you. You're going to still love them, but make sure that you manage them and they don't manage you.
I love it. And you've shown us a few ways how it has changed your life by even speaking about how when you notice the ego wants to come in, how you're aware of it. And so in your book, do you give examples? It sounds like possibly in part 3 about how others can also learn how to be aware of what the ego is when it comes in and then shifting out of it.
Yes, absolutely. So I talk about specific examples, and I'm very vulnerable, and I share these examples about how the ego comes in, how we can watch the ego and love the ego and not let it run the show. So how is that then full circle in terms of effortless abundance? Because the ego keeps us small. So the ego keeps us small. And yes, we can achieve a lot with the ego. We can achieve a certain amount, but it's limited. And it's a lot of hard work, and we get sick from it. Our family suffers, and there's a lot of things that happen that are not conducive to a happy, balanced life. But when we let go of the ego and have blind trust and we surrender, which is so hard. I say this as if it's easy, but it is so hard to have that kind of blind faith, because it could be that you've got no money in the bank, you can't pay your bills, and you still got to have blind faith. So I talk about, the balancing of all of that blind faith. But when you really let go and surrender to just turning up, listening to the signs, watching the signs, and following the energy, the things that happen, you can't possibly work out. The quantum leaps that will happen in your life are so magical and so incredible, and they take you to a whole new, different level. So that's what we're talking about when we say effortless abundance, less push, more joy.
I cannot wait to read this book. It's so exciting. And I know that we have more to talk about in some following episodes, because I still can't wait to hear about how it really truly changed your life, how you see life differently, and how others can do it also, because it sounds like there's a little bit of a how-tos there in that third section, correct?
The whole book is a teaching memoir. So it's section 2 and section 3 is all teaching. So it's about my experiences, but they're not relevant unless there's lessons here for everybody, and there is. And so if you are someone who's a workaholic, who is doing more than you feel you can cope with, who's feeling overwhelmed, who's feeling anxious, who knows that you are part of something more, who's starting to see the signs, but you don't know quite what to make out of it, this is the book for you. And I'm very excited to take you along on the journey.
Yes, it is. And I know that that person that you're speaking to, that was you, and that is not you anymore. And so you've been there, right? So you're that person that's been there. And there's many, many women and men out there that have been there or are there also. And I can't wait for them to be able to read it and learn from your experiences. So thank you for
Thank you.
explaining all that.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for watching. We hope you loved it.
And if you did, please like this video and subscribe to the channel.
And remember, always connect to your truest essence.
And choose love. We'll see you next time.